I'm Meg Carney, an outdoor and environmental journalist, and this is the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. Thank you for joining us so that together we can create a better outdoor space as we recreate. We have reached the final Monday of 2024, and what a year it has been. This year has undoubtedly been the best year for the Outdoor Minimalist podcast and all of our productions. And as our final episode of the year, we want to celebrate some of our wins with all of you. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, this is honestly a great place to start. In this episode, we looked back at the entire year of 2024 and found our top 5 most downloaded episodes. So you'll get to hear a clip from each one of those, and hopefully it will inspire you to listen to them completely. If you're someone that listens every Monday, we hope that you'll still tune in and walk down memory lane with us. It has been such an honor to grow Outdoor Minimalist the last few years, and as you may know, this year we added a second show to the lineup, Forever Chemicals. The Forever Chemicals podcast was a huge undertaking, I cannot lie, but I am so glad that we decided to tackle this topic. I learned so much throughout the production, and it has inspired us to continue to branch out into other important and less told stories that impact our outdoor communities. We may have another new podcast coming for 2025, pending funding, so stay tuned for updates on that. So before we get to the top 5 episodes of the Outdoor Minimalist podcast in 2024, let's take a quick look back at Forever Chemicals.
PFAS are known as forever chemicals because so many of them have been found to last essentially on geologic time. They don't break down naturally in the environment.
You have 2 main sources. From production, you have point sources. You have emissions from industrial chemicals, surfactants, like emulsifiers in fluoropolymer production. So quite big volumes. We're talking about thousands of tons every year into water currents. And since they don't fully degrade, they don't mineralize, they only the concentrate, the background level, we call them, is increasing slowly over time. And eventually this water becomes drinking water sooner or later, and there we are.
What we find is that in the food chain, these molecules that go into organisms and lodge into the fat or oils in their cells or in their tissues and stay there, because they aggregate. These longer chain ones tend to stay into fat and not want to get into urine and be excreted from the bodies. And so what you find is up the food chain, they accumulate, they bioaccumulate. They've even seen whales and polar bears with PFAS in their bodies as a result of this bioaccumulation and the fact that they're very resistant to degradation.
Well, what I can say as a physician is that these chemicals can enter the body, and that some of them can stay there for many, many years. You will, over time, accumulating more and more in your body if the exposure continues, and therefore we're concerned about the long-term adverse health effects.
So we need action to not only clean up and mitigate our exposure to PFAS that are out there in the environment, but we need to cut it off at the tap. We need to cut it off at the source. And that's why we need leadership from government leaders, and that's why we also need leadership from the business community to take action on this urgent environmental and public health crisis that is impacting people all across the United States and all across the world.
Join us on March 4th, 2024, in the 10-part podcast series Forever Chemicals, as we explore the rise, scientific cover-ups, pollution, and now regulations of the class of chemicals known as PFAS. Forever Chemicals is an independent podcast series produced by Black-Footed Ferret Productions. As an independent podcast, our goal is to provide free and accessible, unbiased information for all. If you'd like to support our mission, head to our show notes and donate to our GoFundMe. The Forever Chemicals project changed my life in many ways, and it sparked a lot of conversation in the outdoor industry and beyond. I'm immensely grateful for everyone who contributed to the creation of that show. Much of it was supported via crowdfunding in order to remain independent. So thank you for everyone who supported us monetarily during that journey. And thank you to others who maybe simply donated their time to help make it such a success. The Forever Chemicals podcast became the #1 chemistry podcast in the United States. It was a top 20 science podcast on Apple Podcasts for several weeks, and we had a homepage feature on the Apple Podcast app for Earth Month. Not only that, but I got to meet one of my biggest inspirations, Robert Balot. He's changed so many lives for the better, and I'm so glad that he took the time to share his story with all of us as well. Forever Chemicals has also recently been nominated for the Best Sports Documentary Podcast for the Sports Podcast Awards. While the category may seem a little bit strange, I still think it's really nice to be recognized for our hard work and the dedication we had to this project. Since we cover outdoor gear and sports equipment in the show, it does make sense that we were included in this category, but to win, we need your vote. The link to vote is in the show notes, and voting will be open until January 13th. So please take a moment to cast your vote and hopefully help Forever Chemicals become an award-winning podcast series. With that, let's get to our top 5 episodes of 2024 on the Outdoor Minimalist podcast, starting with number 5. So stay tuned until the end to hear which episode was our most listened to this year. Number 5 is episode 132, What Skiing Taught Me About Taking Business Risks, with Ted Ligety.
The reason I started Shred was after I won the Olympics in 2006, I was looking out there and it was like my options for, I was thinking about goggles because that was like, I think my biggest pain point at the time was you either look like a 60-year-old German tourist or like the very Eurocentric brands, or like the bigger, like huge conglomerate brands had, bad, like the Oakleys or Smiths or whatever, had bad lenses, small field of view. Just really didn't work with what I was trying to do. So I was like, I need to create something that I think is cool. Like when I go free skiing with my buddies back in Utah, that I'm like not ashamed to wear, but also has the performance elements that I need in order to compete the best. And then that also came along with the coinciding business that I started with a partner of mine who'd been making protective gear for myself for years. And so the two of us started from there. And the protection side of it was obviously really important from the get-go too, because like I said, like survivability, longevity, trying to create a long career in a risky sport, protection was really important as well. So, trying to create, the best stuff that allowed me to go faster, but also stay safer was kind of like always the ethos. And I always thought, take goggles for an example, like we've been working with MIT for a bunch of years on lens technology. And so in ski racing, like when it's flat light, that can be a matter of seconds between one person and the next if the light changes a little bit. Whereas my wife, who's a recreational skier, that's the difference between her going to the lodge or still skiing, So these kind of problems that I had as a professional skier also trickle down to the average skier as well. So that's why we pushed hard on our contrast boosting lens technology that we've developed with MIT, which is really to defeat flat light, but turned out to be a lens that works awesome all winter long. And so like on the back protection side, like we created the first ever soft and flexible back protector, because who really wants to wear a hard plastic shell on their back when they're out skiing? Like that's not going to be a usable experience. And we found it's actually safer to have a soft and flexible back protector that gets hard on impact. And so that makes it so the usability case is way, way higher. And so with Shred, we really thought about trying to like kind of conquer these solutions that at the highest level, somebody who's out there trying to win races or win in a half pipe or do big mountain stuff, what do they need to perform at their best? But does that also fall down to the recreational skier? In 99% of cases, yes, it does.
Number 4 is episode 137, Travel is Not Sustainable, with Brianne and Dave Keifner.
I'm a huge proponent of adventuring in your own backyard. I think there's a ton of amazing things you can do. I like camping with our son in our own backyard, for example. I think that can be a ton of fun. You don't have to drive anywhere. But, some of the other things that we try to focus and kind of steer our clients into different ways of thinking, for example, is I think a lot of us are this way. Whenever we sign up for a new trip or maybe a new adventure, one of the exciting things is going to your local REI and kind of picking out the new gear that you need. And, that was always kind of a fun thing to do. But it, of course, comes with huge environmental impacts. And it's financial impacts to your wallet too. And so one of the things we started doing with our clients is actually reimbursing clients if they need gear repaired before their trip. So if they need to take their boots to their local cobbler, we'll reimburse them for that. Same with if they take public transportation, like light rail, to the airport. So it's not much, but it's helping to like slowly change that way of thinking of, oh, I don't need to buy something new. That jacket I've had, that'll do just fine. I just need to get that, zipper fixed, for example. Just trying to shift the mindset a little bit more.
Yeah. And we also, for our trips in particular, we include all rentals. And if somebody comes to me saying they need socks and a jacket, I will source it. I will find one for you to borrow. And we really encourage that community aspect. Like, we don't all need to have a lawnmower. Why don't we have one for the entire block? And we have our days that we use it. Why do we all feel this need to own every single thing that we use once or twice a year? So we do include all of the rentals, and I am very available to help people source borrowing things, anything of that nature, because I think that actually is a much bigger hit to the environment than people even realize, just those REI trips.
Number 3 is episode 146, How to Apply Minimalism to Ultralight Backpacking with Glenn Van Pesky.
I was brought up on the importance of generosity. My mom never gave us a lecture, but she just demonstrated that and how she noticed needs and quietly and anonymously most of the time took care of those. And so, as I lowered my pack weight and I started sewing my own gear, I put the plans for free on the internet so that anyone could make their own. It was never my goal to make a business out of it or to make any money out of it. In fact, I've never taken a salary from Gossamer Gear. I think often when you're in the backcountry, you're in a situation where people tend to be more generous. You tend to share what you have. You meet someone, you're a long way from anywhere. And so you don't figure it's someone else's job to take care of something. You meet someone and they didn't pack enough food. Everyone in your group kind of ponies up a food bar or something to help get them to the next resupply. So I think that happens in the backcountry. And that's, being generous has resulted in so much richness in my life. I had a book I recently read, Infectious Generosity by Chris Anderson, the TED Talk guy, was super interesting about how the impact of being generous. They figured there are multiple studies that show that most people think that to be happy, they need about a 20% increase in salary. And different studies come up with different numbers. But basically, if I had just, a little more money, then I'd be happy. But studies also show that when you get that money, the happiness doesn't last very long because that's your new standard. So you adapt to that. And then you think, well, if I just had a little more money, then I'd be happy. And they did these studies on generosity that showed that people who were generous experienced a happiness roughly equivalent to a doubling of salary, which was staggering to me, and also found that it didn't go away with time. So it wasn't like you got used to that generosity and it didn't give that happiness kick anymore. That continued on. So I think there's some real, benefits to your personal well-being and happiness from being generous. As far as gratitude, there's nothing like ultralight backpacking to make you appreciate, kind of as we discussed before, all the conveniences that we take for granted. So it kind of resets what your expectations are of life when you're out there with 5-pound base pack weight, sleeping on the ground and, climbing over logs and walking through rain. Boy, you don't look at your car the next time when you can get in there and go somewhere without hardly lifting a finger. One thing I read on gratitude once that changed the way I thought on this was a post by David Epstein. And he talked about a matrix of things that we want and things that we have, things that we don't want, and things that we don't have. And so most people, we're grateful for the things that we want, that we have. That's pretty normal. I think in our society, a lot of time is devoted to things that we want, but we don't have, or things that we think we want, or it seems like everyone else has on their Instagram feeds or whatever. And of course, there's huge industries built on, giving us ads to show us what we should want and don't have. But he says we miss a huge opportunity for gratitude in considering things that we don't have that we also don't want. And there are so many opportunities you can look at hardships other people are going through, and they could be people, or even just in the news, people in other parts of the world. And it's, you may think your life is stressful and you've got deadlines and things like that, or you've got relationship issues. And then you see someone living in a tent in Sudan or in a bombed out building in Gaza and go, yeah, maybe my life's not as bad as I think.
Number 2 is episode 122, Becoming Ultralight, a long-distance backpacker's lessons in gear, with Sarah Berkeley.
I ended up going through 3 different backpacks on the Pacific Crest Trail. So that first one, the straps were they were too wide and they were set too far apart for me. So they were over my rotator cuffs. And so I could, using trekking poles was uncomfortable and probably could have caused an injury. So actually, I ditched my trekking poles partly as a way to go lighter, but also because it was so uncomfortable and hard to use. And, that can be a real safety issue, and did become a safety issue for me. When I flipped up to Washington and, I slipped, there was this kind of traverse and I slipped, and there I was literally hanging by my fingernails on the side of this snow-covered mountain. And, if I had a trekking pole, that might not have happened. So having a backpack that fits it can actually be a real safety concern. So that was the first one. The second one, had women specific straps and hip belt, but by that point, the volume of it was just too big because I had started to go a little lighter. So I found it kind of hanging around my hips, and I call it kind of the diaper effect, where it's just kind of sagging there. So that one I found is a good pack for if I'm carrying a bear canister or some other heavier winter gear and stuff. Having that framed pack that's larger is helpful. I went and got another one that had a running vest front on it because I started to move quite quickly, especially, in those hot summer days when I didn't have much gear. So I started running on trail, especially the downhill part into town when, the backpack's empty, you don't have any food left. And it's wake up in the morning, run into town and get some food. So I was oh, the running vest front will be great because then I won't have a whole bag sloshing around and it'll hold steady. And I kind of wondered, I was well, is it going to squish my boobs? I was oh, I have really small boobs. Maybe it'll probably be fine. It was so not fine. Oh my God. It was so horrible. And, once we're through hiking, you're out there, it's not you can just go back to the store the next day and swap something out. So I hiked the entire length of Oregon with this incredibly uncomfortable backpack. And then that company they did have S-curve straps that I could switch out. So once I got into a place with internet and stuff, I ordered those, but then I still have to wait for those to get shipped to the next thing. And meanwhile, I was seeing all these guys with all kinds of cool ultralight packs. And then I get up close and see oh, it had a fixed sternum strap. And I was well, I could order one of those, but is it going to work? I don't know. It's just a crapshoot because women's bodies are all so different. We need more adjustability because there's just a lot of variables. So yeah, I found that really frustrating. And then I emailed one company and said, hey, can you make that pack just make it with an adjustable sternum strap? And they didn't even email me back. And I felt really frustrated and really kind of excluded and not seen. Yeah. So then after the PCT, I was really hoping someone else would start this company that was women specific gear, and they didn't. So 2 years later, I was well, I guess it's me.
And our top #1 most downloaded episode in 2024 was episode 120, Building a Healthier Relationship with Food on and Off the Trail, featuring Heather Kelly.
I will say, as somebody who went from, again, exercising 24 hours a week to basically walking my dog full time, you would think that there would be a great big reduction in the number of calories that I eat every day. However, as somebody who continues to track my food as just a tool in my toolkit, it's really incredible for me to see how much food I'm still able to enjoy each day and maintain some energy levels. What I do find that I think is applicable for a lot of people is that we can end up eating foods that actually detract from our energy. So it's not so much that we're underfed, it's that we're eating foods that don't actually agree with our system. So for some people, that could be alcohol, it could be sugar, it could be processed inflammatory foods, pro-inflammatory fats, it could be foods that your gut is sensitive to. And I think that lack of awareness or that lack of desire to acknowledge, maybe the 2 glasses of wine at the end of the day actually aren't working for you. Case in point, like I am that person that is in complete denial that my body hates alcohol, but like I love to finish my day with 2 glasses of wine and call it good. And I think that that's where we get into more of that conversation around our relationship with food, right? If I am intentionally ignoring the signals that my body is sending me, I am further creating a gap between the trust that I have with my body and my body trusting me to take care of it. And just like any relationship, when you are constantly undermining what the other party is asking you for, right, it creates a sense of distrust. So I think for a lot of people, there's an opportunity to get really curious and to really kind of own and acknowledge where you are disowning your body or ignoring your body's signals, whether that's for more food, less food, different food, more sleep, more water, whatever it is. But especially in modern day society, I think that we are highly, highly conditioned to ignore our body's signals and to instead look to external resources to tell us how to feed ourselves.
Thank you again for listening to the Outdoor Minimalist podcast. Whether you've been here since day one or this is your first time listening, I'm so grateful that you've spent time with us here. This podcast has changed my life for the better and has given me the opportunity to not only share meaningful moments, conversations, and lessons with all of you, but I've gotten to meet so many amazing people and learn from them alongside the listeners. So here's to another year of learning, growing, and hopefully tuning into the Outdoor Minimalist podcast every Monday. We have some cool things in store for 2025, and I hope you'll join us.